Maniac McGee, Chapter 36. The deal was, if Russell and Piper went to school for the rest of the week, Maniac would show them the shortcut to Mexico on Saturday. He figured if they all managed to survive till then, he'd come up with something. On Saturday, the boys had their paper bag packed, and Maniac had a new deal. Go to school for another week, and he'd treat them to another large pizza. Besides, he said, crossing his fingers, this was volcano season down in Mexico. The whole place was a sheet of red-hot lava. You better wait till it cools down. They bought it, and they bought the same deal the following week. But school was still agony for the boys. It had to be worth more than a pizza a week, but what? The brothers thought and thought about it, and soon began to realize that the answer was sleeping between them every night. Ever since the famous Maniac McGee had showed up at their house, Russell and Piper had become famous in their own right. Other kids were always crowding around, pelting them with questions. What's he like? What does he say? What does he do? Did he really sit on Finsterwald's front steps? Is he really that fast? Kids started giving them knots, sneaker laces, yo-yo strings, toys, and saying, hey, ask Maniac to undo this, will ya? Really little kids referred to him as Mr. Maniac. The McNabbs ate it up. In the streets, the playgrounds of school, the attention, not the pizza, was the real reason they put up with school each day. They began to feel something they had never felt before. They began to feel important. What a wonderful thing, this importance. Waiting for them the moment they awoke in the morning, pumping them up like basketballs, giving them bounce. And they hadn't even had to steal it. They loved it. The more they had, the more they wanted. And so when Maniac tried to cut the next pizza for school deal, Russell answered, no. No, echoed Maniac, who had been afraid it would come to this. No, said Russell, we want something else. Oh, said Maniac. What's that? They told him if he wanted another week's worth of school out of them, he was going to have to enter Finsterwald's backyard and stay there for 10 minutes. Yeah, stay there for 10 minutes, screeched Piper, who shuddered at the very thought of it, and Maniac casually answered, okay. It's a deal. Piper ran shrieking from the house, and on the next Saturday morning, Russell, Piper, and Maniac set out for Finsterwald's house, about 7 blocks away. They took the alleys, and along the way they were joined by other kids who were waiting, their eyes at once fearful and excited. And by the time they got to Finsterwald's backyard, at least 15 kids huddled against the garage door on the far side of the alley. Maniac didn't hesitate. He walked straight up to the back gate, opened it, and went in. Not only that, he went all the way to the center of the yard, turned, folded his arms, smiled, and called, all right, who's keeping time? Russell, his throat too dry to speak, raised his hand. And for 10 minutes, 15 kids, and possibly the universe, held their breath. The only sounds were inside their heads, the moaning and the wailing of the ghosts of all the poor slobs who had ever blundered onto Finsterwald's property. And to the utter amazement of all, when Russell finally croaked, time! Maniac McGee was still there, alive, smiling, apparently unharmed. Even more amazing, he didn't come out. Instead, he said, say, you guys, how about adding to the deal? If I do something else while I'm in here, will you make it the next 2 weeks at school? Well, what are you going to do? Stammered Russell. Maniac thought for a minute, and then he announced brightly, I'll go knock on the door. Five kids, Finsterwalded on the spot. Several others screamed, no, don't! Piper went into some sort of fit and began kicking the garage door, and Russell zoned out. Maniac took all this to signify a deal, and he hopped the backyard fence, and he strolled around front. The others went back down the alley and around the long way. They stationed themselves not only across the street, but almost halfway up the block. And even then they squeezed together in a bunch, as though, if they allowed any space between them, Finsterwald might somehow pick them off one by one. They huddled, trembling, to bear witness to the last seconds of Maniac McGee's life. They saw him stand directly in front of the red brick 3-story house, the bile green window shades, and they saw him climb the 3 cement steps to the white door, the portal of death. They saw him raise his hand, and though they were too far away to hear, they saw him knock on the door, and 15 hearts beat in time to that silent knocking. The door opened. Finsterwald's door opened. Not much, but enough so the witness could make out a thin strip of blackness. Would Maniac be sucked into the black hole like so much lint into a vacuum cleaner? Would Finsterwald's long, bony hand dart out quick as a lizard's tongue and snatch poor Maniac? Maniac appeared to be speaking to the dark crack. Was he pleading for his life? Would his last words be skewered like a marshmallow by Finsterwald's dagger-tipped cane? Apparently not. The door closed. Maniac bounded down the steps and came jogging towards them, grinning. 3 kids bolted, sure that he was a ghost. The others stayed. They invented excuses to touch him, to see if he was still himself, still warm. But they weren't positively certain until later, when they watched him devour a pack of butterscotch crimpets. Chapter 37. Thus began a series of heroic feats by Maniac McGee. At 20 paces, he hit a telephone pole with a stone 61 times in a row. When the once-a-week freight train hit Elm Street, he started running from the Oriole Street dead end on one rail. And he beat the train to the park, no sweat. He took off his sneaks and socks, and he walked, nonchalant as you please, through the rat-infested dump at the foot of Rako Hill. The mysterious hole down by the creek, the one you would never reach into even if you dropped your most valuable possession into, he stuck his hand in. He stuck his arm in. All the way to the elbow. He kept it there for the longest 60 seconds on record, and he pulled it out, dirty, but still full of fingers. He climbed the fence at the American Bison Pen at the zoo. He had suggested this feat himself. Everyone else was scoffing, and while the mother looked on, he kissed the baby buffalo. Nobody knows why buffalo became bull in the song. Remember at the beginning, Maniac, Maniac, don't go to school. Maniac, Maniac, kiss the boo. Nobody knows why buffalo became bull in the jump rope song. History often gets things wrong. So it went through February and March of that year, a feat a week. To much of the town, hearing about these things, it was simply a case of the legend adding to itself, doing what legends do. But to Russell and Piper McNabb, it was a case of boosting their importance even higher in the eyes of the other kids. Was it not at the brothers' direction that Maniac McGee performed these deeds? And who, after all, is more amazing, the lion or the tamer? As for Maniac, he understood early on that he was being used for the greater glory of Russell and Piper. He also understood that without him, they would not be going to school every day. For the McNabbs, there was nothing free about public education. A tuition had to be paid, and every week, Maniac paid it. And besides, he loved to meet the challenges that they cooked up for him. And then one day they gave him the most perilous challenge of all. They dared him to go in to the East End. Chapter 38. The witnesses. There were twice 15 this time. Twice 15, that means 30. They went with him as far as Hector Street. They halted at the curb, and he crossed the street, and he went on. Alone. Piper megaphoned after him. Maniac, come back! We was just kidding, you don't have to go! Maniac just waved and went on. He knew he should be feeling afraid of these East Enders, these so-called black people. He knew he should be afraid. But he wasn't. It was himself that he was afraid of. He was afraid of any trouble that he might cause just by being here. It was the day of the worms. You know, that first almost warm after the rainy night day in April when you bolt from your house to find yourself in a world of worms? They were as numerous here in the East End as they had been in the West. The sidewalks, the streets, the very places where they didn't belong. Forlorn, marooned on concrete and asphalt, no place to burrow. April's orphans. Once when he was little in Hollidaysburg, he had gone along with his toy wheelbarrow, carefully lifting the worms with a borrowed kitchen fork until the wheelbarrow was full, and then he dumped them into Mr. Snavely's compost pile. And as sure as the worms followed the rain, the kids followed the worms. West End, East End, they had poured from their houses onto the cool, damp sidewalks, and if they gave the worms any notice, it was only when they squashed one underfoot. And so as Maniac moved through the East End, he felt the presence of not one, but two populations, both occupying the same territory, yet each unmindful of the other, one yelping and playing and chasing and laughing, and the other one was lost and silent and dying by the millions. He's talking about the worms. Yo, fish belly! Maniac snapped to. He glanced at a street sign, and he was 4 blocks from Hector, deep into the East End. Mars Bar came dip-jiving towards him. Taller than before, bigger, but still scowling. Hey, fish, I thought you was gone. Maniac turned to face him fully, and Mars Bar did not stop till he was inside Maniac's phone booth of space. Inches from his face. They locked eyes levelly, and Maniac thinking, I must be growing too, he said. I'm back! The scowl fiercened. Maybe nobody told you, but I'm better than ever. I'm getting better every day. I'm almost afraid to wake up in the morning because of how bad I might have got overnight. Maniac smiled and nodded. Yeah, you're bad, Mars. He gave a sniff. His smile went a little smirky. Yeah, and I'm getting so bad myself, I think I might be half black. Mars's eyes bulged. He backed off, the scowl collapsed, and he howled with laughter. His buddies who were hanging back, they stared dumbly. And as Mars unwound from his laughing fit, he studied Maniac up and down, aware too that Maniac was studying him. When he could speak again, he said, Yeah, you still got them raggedy clothes, huh, Fishbelly? He lifted one foot and posed. Oh, I seen you looking. Look at them kicks. Just got 'em. Maniac nodded. They're nice. They were more than nice. They were beautiful. They were the best. Yes, they were the baddest. The baddest sneakers he'd ever seen. Way better than anything Grayson could have afforded. Forgot to tell you something else too, Fishbelly. What's that? I'm fast. I'm faster. I've been working out. I got my new boss kicks on my feet. He sprinted in place, arms and legs pistoning to a blur. He stopped and he jabbed a finger at Maniac's nose, pressed it, flattening the soft end of it. See? I guess you was right. Psst. Now at least you got a black nose. He laughed. Maniac laughed. Everybody laughed. And then Mars Bar turned scowl again, saying, I bet you ain't black enough, and you ain't bad enough to beat the Mars man. Oh, we gonna race, honky donkey. Side note, back in the 1960s and 70s, that was a word used for white people. It was intended to be a racial slur. The race was set up on Plum Street, the long level block between Ash and Jackson, and by the time they were ready, half the kids in the East End were there. From the tiniest pipsqueaks to the high schoolers, the little kids ran races of their own from curb to curb. The bigger kids shouldered blaster radios and dug into their jeans for coins to bet with. And for the first time since last fall, mothers opened windows and leaned out from second stories. Traffic was detoured from both ends of the block. No one could find string for the finish, so a second-story mother dropped down a spool of bright pink thread. Another problem was the start. First, they had to find chalk to draw the starting line, and when they did, nobody could seem to draw it straight. The result? A stack of starting lines creeping up the street till somebody brought out a yardstick and did it right. The next problem came when the starter, Bump Gilliam, who was also Mars Bar's best pal, yelled, "Get ready!" And somebody in the crowd yelled, "That ain't what you say. You're supposed to say, 'Take your mark.'" Well, everybody jumped into it then. There was shoving and jawing and almost a fistfight over the proper way to start a race. And finally, there was a compromise, and Bump Gilliam called out, "All right, get ready on your mark." At which point someone called out, "You go, Mars!" And Bump turned and snarled, "Shut up! When the starter says this starts, there's no noise." So naturally, someone else called out, "Smoke 'em, Mars!" And then someone came, "You waste 'em, Mars!" And then someone said, do that honky bar, man!" And they might still be calling to this day had not a single voice separated itself from the others. "Yo, you burn 'em, McGee!" It was hands down. He was laughing and pointing from his perch on the roof of a car. Bump Gilliam jumped into the let-up. "Get set!" Jumped into the let-up. "Get set! Go!" And at long last, mossy from their weight at the starting line, they went. Even as the race began, even after it began, Maniac wasn't sure how to run this race. Naturally, he wanted to win. All kids do, or at least do his best. All his instincts told him that. But there were other things to think about. There were other considerations. Who he was racing against, or should I say, whom he was racing against, where he was racing, and what might the consequences be if he won. These were heavy considerations, heavy enough to slow him down, until the hysterical crowd and the sight of Mars Bar's sneaker bottoms, that means he's behind, and the boiling of his own blood ignited his afterburners, and before you could say, "Burn him, McGee," he was ahead of Mars Bar, the pink thread bobbing in his sights. But he never saw his body break the thread of the finish line. He saw only the face of Mars Bar, straining and gasping and unbelieving and losing. When he crossed the finish line, why was he looking at Mars Bar's face? Hint. He ran the last part of the race backwards. They went crazy. They went wild. They went totally bananas. "You see him? He turned around!" "Yeah, man, he ran backwards." "Yeah, man, he did it backwards. He beat him going backwards." Mars Bar tried. He shoved Bump. "You started too fast. I wasn't ready." Excuses. He shoved the thread holder. "You moved it up so he could win. I was gaining on him." Excuses. He shoved Maniac. You bumped me. You got a false start and you cheated." Excuses. But his protests were drowned out in the pandemonium. Oh, why did I do it? That was all Maniac could think about. Why did I do it? He hadn't even realized he was doing it till he crossed the line, and he regretted doing it instantly. Wasn't it enough to just win? Did he have to disgrace Mars Bar as well? Had he done it deliberately to pay Mars Bar back for all his nastiness, to show him up and shut him up once and for all? His only recollection was a feeling of sheer, joyful exuberance, himself in celebration, shouting amen like he was in the Bethany church, or bashing John McNabb's fastballs out of sight, or dancing the polka with Grayson. Maybe it was just that simple. After all, who asks why that otters toboggan down mud banks? But that didn't make it any less stupid or a rotten thing to do. The hatred in Mars Bar's eyes was no longer for a white kid from the East End. The hatred in his eyes now was for Jeffrey McGee, period. The crowd surged with him as he made his way westward. It wasn't clear whether they were glad or not that he had won, only that they had seen something to set them off. They jostled and jammed and high-fived and jived, and for everyone who called him White Lightning, 2 more challenged him to a race. Right here, baby, you and me! We'll see who's going to turn his back on who. Maniac kept moving, embarrassed, wishing he could just break out and sprint for the West End, wishing he could duck into the Beals' house and be sanctuaried there and not fear the reprisals on them. And just about then, miraculously, 2 little hands were worming into his, 2 familiar voices, squealing, Maniac! Maniac! It was Hester and Lester. He snatched them up, one in each arm, and he was on Sycamore Street. There was the house, and the door was opening. Amanda, Mrs. Beale, were smiling to beat the band.